Hello everyone, so my name is David Yohanedi Putra, and in this video I will talk about war crime. So what is war crime? What the element of war crime? What can be said as a war crime? So the first I want to talk about what is war crime. So in this section, in this slide, I will talk about the definition, what is war crime, and the other thing related to the defining what is a war crime is. So the first one is the definition under the Article 8.2. So it says that for the purpose of the statute, war crimes means A. Grave breaches of the Geneva Convention of 12 August 1949, namely any of the following act against person or property protected under the provision of the relevant Geneva Convention, which is the first one is willful killing, torture, or inhuman treatment, including biological experiment. The third is willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health. The fourth is extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly. The fifth is compelling a prisoner of war or other protected person to serve in the forces of a hostile power. The sixth is willfully depriving a prisoner of war or other protected person of the right of fair and legal trial. The seventh is unlawfully deportation or transfer or unlawfully confinement. And the last one is taking of a hostage. Uh, in this article, also defining other means that is other serious violation of the law and the custom applicable in the international armed conflict within the establishment framework of international law, namely any of the following act, which is there is a lot. It is the first one is intentionally directed attack, intentionally directed attack against civilian object, intentionally directed attack against uh, personnel and etc. Other. And the next is about the war crimes is also mean in the case of an armed conflict, not an international character, serious violation of Article 3 common to the four Geneva Convention of 12 August 1949, namely any of the following act commit against a person taking no active part in the hostile, including member of armed force who have laid down their arm and those placed hors the combat by sickness, wound, detention, or any other causes. So the first one is violence to life and person, particularly murder of all kind, mutilation, cruel treatment, and torture. The second is committing outrage upon personal dignity, and particularly hum- humiliating and degrading treatment. The third is taking of a hostage, and the fourth is the passing of sentence and the carrying out the execution without previous judgment pronounced by a regular constituted court affording all judicial guarantee which are generally recognized as indispensable. And then paragraph 2.c applies to armed conflict, not an international character, and does not apply to situations of international disturbance and tension, such as riot, assault, and sporadic act of violence or other act of similar nature. And other serious violation of the law and custom applicable in armed conflict not of an international character established from international law. So that's the definition under Article 8.2. And I want to talk about more about what is war crimes. So the war, uh, not all the crime that has been done in a war is considered as a war crime. So in war, there is also a law that uh, uh, limit the war itself. So it named as international humanitarian law that responsible uh, to limit the what can be done and what cannot be done by the state to end the war. So the war crime can be considered as the breaches of violation of AIHL or international humanitarian law. So there is in international humanitarian law if there's someone or the state or individual that breach the violation of this international humanitarian law, it can be considered as a war crime. So now we will talk about what can be said as war crime or uh, uh, another mean was what is the element of the war crime. So there is a variation of what is the element of war crime. So the first one, not the first one, the first the element of war crime is the the drift breaches of the 1949 Geneva Convention related to international armed conflict. Another second, other serious violation of the law and custom applicable in international armed conflict. The third is serious violation of Article 3 common to the 1949 Geneva Convention related to armed conflict, not of an international character. And the last one is other serious violation of the law and custom applicable in armed conflict, not of an international character. So from this description, that from a more substantive perspective, war crime could be divided into war crime against person requiring particular protection, war crime against those providing humanitarian assistance and peacekeeping operation, war crimes against the property and other rights, and the prohibited method of warfare and prohibited means of warfare. So this, and then the next one, the type of element, then another type of element of war crime is that the first one is there must be armed conflict the uh, in the war crime. So there must have been an armed conflict when and where alleged crimes were committed. So So there is the fundamental requirement of war crimes that the crime occur during an armed conflict. There is something that must have that element for that crime to be said as the war crime. So for the prosecution of crime, it must be shown that the conflict was of either international or non-international character. And in international armed conflict, defined as a result to armed force between states. And an armed conflict can become a mixed conflict, which is both international and non-international in character. Yet another state interfere with troops or some of the participants of international conflict act behalf of another state. The ICTY appeal chamber provides definition of an armed conflict, and the nexus requirement in the studied case is that the geographical and temporal frame of reference uh, the geographical and temporal frame of reference is broad. So this conception is reflected in the fact that beneficial common of Article 3 of the Geneva is reflected in the fact that beneficiary of common of Article 3, I'm sorry. So this concept is reflected in the fact that beneficiary of common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention are those taking no active part or no longer taking active part in the hostilities. So, so that this indicates that the rules contained in common Article 3 apply outside the narrow geographical context and the actual theater of combat operation. The nexus required is only a relationship between the conflict and the act, that not the act occur in the mindset of a battle. Okay, so the next one is that the protected person. So there must be or there have to be a protected person in the war crimes. So the victim must be protected under age uh, under IHL, International Humanitarian Law. So the principle of the IHL is military operation must be direct only against military objectives. So what can we say as the military objective? So military objective is include combatant and object of by their nature, location, purpose, or use make an effective contribution to military action and whose total or partially destruction, capture or neutralization in the circumstances, role, and time over definition offer a definite military advantage. So, the war crime of direct attack against civilian or the civilian population or against civilian object are the most elementary and straightforward expression of this principle. So the other prohibited target provisions are in effect simply example of this prohibition, focusing on certain specially protected object or interests. In each of the Geneva Convention, the set condition under which a person or property is protected by its provision. So the third is the nexus. So there must be a sufficient nexus between the accused act and the armed conflict. So not all crime committed during the armed conflict or state of occupation will necessarily be a war crime. So only offenses that are closely related to the armed conflict will constitute a war crime. To determine whether the crime was closely related to the armed conflict, the prosecutor must at least prove that the armed conflict played a substantial part in the perpetrator's ability to commit it. His decision to commit it, the manner in which was committed, or the purpose of which it was committed. So it is enough to accused act in furtherance of under the guise of the crime. And then the next is the existing of IHL or International Humanitarian Law. As I already said before, that the war crime is the violation of the IHLR International Humanitarian Law. So the violation must be a breach of customary or treaty IHL binding on the accused. So if the violation not a breach of a customary or treaty IHL, it could be just ordinary crime. So if the violation, so the war crime, it must be the violation must be a breach of customary or treaty international humanitarian law binding. So the next is the gravity. The gravity is the violation must be serious and involve grave consequences for the victims. So there, so the both the ICTY and ICTR statutes provided only serious violation of the law and custom of war come within their jurisdiction, and that's only such violation may result in individual criminal responsibility pursuant to the statute. So from this the gravity, which means that there must be a serious violation. If it's not really serious, it could be just the crimes against humanity or it just the ordinary crimes. Uh, It's also stated that this requirement excludes violation of many technical regulation and other elements contained in IHL or what can be international humanitarian law. So, an international humanitarian law violation is a serious if it constitutes a breach of a rule protecting important value, and the breach must involve grave consequences for the victim. So, all grave breaches of the Geneva Convention are regarded as serious violation of international humanitarian law. And then the next point is the individual criminal liability. So, individual criminal liability or individual criminal responsibility. So, the violation must entail individual criminal responsibility of person breaching the rules. So, wherever where whatever the violation of international humanitarian law being charged, whether customary or treaty-based, the breach of the rule must entail individual criminal responsibility. So it is not essentially for treaty profession to expressly state the breaches will result in criminal responsibility as long as customary international law support the application of criminal responsibility. Like for the example is like Common Article 3 does not expressly provide for individual criminal responsibility. So the next one is awareness of armed conflict and status of victim, or can be summarized as awareness. It is also necessary to prove that the accused was aware that an armed conflict existed. So some national jurisprudency as well as the ICC element of crime indicate that a person cannot be convicted as a war criminal unless he or she has the necessary awareness of the factual circumstances that makes the conduct a war of crime. So this element can be considered as a knowledge of the accused that he or she may know that there is a cure war or armed conflict when he or she as a perpetrator doing what the violation of the international humanitarian law. And then the last one is the victim or object of the crime, which is the definition of many war crime includes certain criteria with respect of the victim or object of the crime. So, for example, for grave breach in the Geneva Convention, the crime must affect protected person of object. The protected person includes civilian, prisoner of war, and combatant who are no longer able to fight because they are sick, wounded, and shipwrecked. So the next one we will talk about type of war crime or what uh, can be concluded or can be said as a war crime. So the first one, as already said in the definition in the under the article 8.2, there is a willful killing, torture or human treatment, including biological experiment, willful causing great suffering, or serious injury to body or health, extensive destruction, compelling a prisoner of war on those protected, willful depression, unlawful deportation or transfer, and taking a hostage. So another crime is that intentionally directed attack against the civilian population, as such are against individual civilians not taking direct part in hostile. Second is intentionally directing attack against civilians object that is object which are not military objective. And then the third one is intentionally directing attack against personnel, installation, material, unit, or vehicle involved in a humanitarian assistance or peacekeeping mission in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, as long as they are entitled to the protection given to the civilian or civilian objects under the international law of armed conflict. And then the fourth is intentionally launching an attack in the knowledge that such an attack will cause incidentally loss of life or injury to civilian or damage to civilian object or widespread, long-term and severe damage to the natural environment which will be clear excessive in relation to the concrete and direct of raw military advantage anticipated. The fifth is attacking or bombarding by whatever means towns, villages, dwelling, or building which are undefended and which are not military objects. The sixth is killing or wounding the combatant who, having laid down his arm or having no longer means or defense, has surrendered at distraction. The seventh is making improper use of flag, of truce, of the flag and the military insignia and uniform of the enemy of the United Nations, as well as the distinctive emblem of the Geneva Convention. The eighth is the transfer directly or indirectly by the occupying power of part and all civilization population in the territory it occupies, or the deportation transfer. The nine is intentionally directing attack against building dedicated to religion, education, art, science, or charitable purposes, historical monument, hospital, and place where the sick and wounded are collected, provided they are not military objective. The tenth is the subjecting person who are the power of an advanced party and physical mutilation or to medical scientific experiment any kind which are neither justified by medical, dental, or hospital treatment of the person concerned nor carry out is and which cause death to refuse. So and then there is also like a committing outrage upon personal dignity, particularly humiliating and degrading treatment, committing rape, sexual slavery, and forced prostitution, forced pregnancy, as defined as Article 7, Paragraph 2.f, and forced sterilization or any other form of sexual violence, also constituting a grave breach of the Geneva Convention and uh, other war crimes that can be considered a grave breach of the constituting a grave breach of the Geneva Convention. So, in conclusion, that in the war crime, the most and the main element of it is that there must be a violation against international humanitarian law. There must be a protected person that as uh, uh, directed against, and then there must be an armed conflict. So that is the three that have to be in a war crime to be considered as war crime. So it makes the differ between war crime and crimes against humanity, crimes against crimes of aggression, and genocide. So that's all. So that's all from me. That's all about the crime, the war crime. Uh, if so, that's it. Thank you.